We have a new expert we'd like to introduce you to today, Dr. Tim Rouer from Neurocare.
They're the new experts in behavioral health, dealing with things like ADHD, sleep, and even migraine problems. And thanks for joining us, Tim, our new expert today in behavioral health, and we're excited to have you along. Now, my first question, simple, explain Neurocare and your background.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's great to be with you guys. I'm glad that we can get this whole relationship started here. Neurocare dates back about 20 years. I was division chief of pediatric psychology at DeVos Children's Hospital for a number of years. And as the head of that department, we would see all different kinds of kids, adolescents come through the doors that had had diagnosis of things for years. And it was very concerning for me that a couple things kept coming up over and over again, and one of the things that these kids were getting over-medicated and get to the point that they'd have to get admitted to the hospital, sometimes on the ICU, hooked up to life support. Very concerning, and so it started to raise some questions in my mind about how accurate are these diagnoses that are being given. And so a study that we did in the 90s looked at something like ADHD, for instance, and we found out that over 66% of people are misdiagnosed with ADD. They don't even have the disorder.
But they're labeled as being ADHD or have some other kind of behavioral catch-all that goes under that category. Then they're prescribed a medication, which probably they don't even need in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
And some of these drugs are very, powerful.
Right, and so we wanted to develop an organization that would really get to understanding these diagnoses. And so many times people get what we call a level 1 diagnosis, which is answering a few questions on a checklist, and all of a sudden they get diagnosed with something, and nobody ever looked at their brain. We measured the amount of time it takes people to get diagnosed with things like ADHD or sleep problems. Less than 7 minutes.
Wow.
In many cases, and nobody ever looks at your brain. That's like during heart surgery by just asking you, well, how's your chest feeling? Are you kidding me? It doesn't make any sense.
Or what's your blood pressure? Here, I guess you need to have a heart transplant. Right. So tell us about the brain, because you talk about the power of the brain. It's pretty complex when they talk about the physiology of it all.
Yeah, the brain is truly the most amazing thing in the universe. It's your greatest commodity, okay? It's not the paycheck, it's not the job. Your brain and how it functions determines your entire future. It determines your physiological health, everything, and especially for your kids, it's how their brain's working. It's not their behaviors per se, it's what's going on in the brain that drives the behaviors. And so the first thing we want to look at is, how does the brain affect my physical being? Your brain is doing some amazing things without you even thinking about it. Like right now, when we look at the physiological components of the brain, your brain is operating your body temperature, for instance, 98.6. You're not even thinking about it, and the brain's operating that. Then it affects our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and many of us jump right to the behaviors, and we treat these symptoms with these medicines, but we never look at the brain itself. We don't take an image of it. We don't measure a very important thing, which is the electrical current that's flowing through the brain. That's very important.
So maybe people who have different behaviors, their electrical current needs to be changed. Can you even do that?
Yeah. The brain is amazing. It's taking in pieces of information all the time. And if you take the brain and hook it up to a virtual speedometer with computer technology, which we do in our offices all the time, okay, we have 8 different offices, and we have people come in and we hook the brain right up to the computer, and you can see on the computer how fast or how slow it's going. And so different disorders that we experience come from the brain going too fast or too slow.
Why are people just missing this and not doing this and trying to figure out, why isn't more people, trying to figure out what is wrong with them? Is it just because the doctors aren't, other doctors aren't experienced in this, or it's just the same old methodology?
It's the same methodology. We started using Ritalin in 1957.
Wow.
1957. We've done a few things since 1957.
Yeah,
we've gone
clearly
to the moon and back,
yeah.
Right? And we're still using the same methodology of just asking questions when you can look at the brain in our offices. we're looking at what's going on in the brain. We're not really concerned so much about the behaviors. We want to see the brain. And a lot of it is people just aren't educated. They don't know that when they go into their doctor's office, they should say, I don't want a level 1 diagnosis. I don't want you to just ask me about behaviors. I want you to look at my brain and see what's going on before you throw a chemical in there.
Absolutely.
That's going to change it. Now, there's one other thing, and the other thing that really impacts how we treat the brain is what we're exposed to, which is a lot of stuff from the pharmaceutical industry.
So talk about some of the disorders that you are able to diagnose and treat through Neurocare, through neuropsychology.
Yeah, well, I like to say our focus is very narrow. We only work with people who have brains, okay?
That really limits the population.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I bring an extra one along.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, you have two.
But really, when you look at that, all these different things that we experience that get diagnosed as symptoms, things like ADHD, sleep problems, migraines, people later in life with memory issues, depression, anxiety. We also have this whole other branch of things that we do where we work with athletes, we work with some professional teams, we work with golfers, basketball players, making their brains stronger, and then your overall intellectual functioning. A lot of parents are concerned about their kids doing well on ACTs and SATs. The key to that is make their brain stronger, and nobody's doing that. They're just treating symptoms with medicine and not making the brain strong.
Well, you know, Dr. Rouer, when we first put 8 West on the air, you were a guest because you were working with some high-level athletes who are Olympians.
Right. We were in Beijing at the Olympics, and every week I travel to another city and work with a professional basketball team 2 to 3 days a week. There's a lot of athletes and the owners of these teams that know that if we're spending all this money on these athletes, we better make sure their brain's working right.
Absolutely.
You know? And I think everybody is, if not yourself, you know someone who's afflicted with one of these disorders, so to speak, and you have these great lecture series that you're doing out there. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, well, we're really committed to educating people, because I really think the thing that people don't have, the bridge they don't have to understand the brain, is they don't get the education. You're shuffled in and out of your doctor's office, you see the commercials, and that's what your education is, whatever the drug company's telling you. We want to educate people, so we sit down with people every month and do these lectures for an hour and a half and explain to them the science of their symptoms, not the subjective symptoms, but the science. And we feel the more you understand the science, the more you appreciate the wonder of your brain.
Well, and that's really just kind of the starting point. For people who are viewers of 8 West and attend one of those lectures, you have a really great special that you're offering for people to go to that next step for that initial diagnosis.
Definitely. If you watch 8 West and you go to one of these lectures, we have them coming up in Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Lansing. You go to one of these lectures and attend the lecture, typically a $250 assessment. We're going to give you $190 off. Not $190 for the assessment, but $60 for the assessment if you go to the lecture and mention that you've been watched this segment on 8 West.
And people can register by going to your website, theneurocore.com, and also read a lot more about exactly what you do at Neurocare and the physiology of our brain.
And that's exactly what I did. I checked out your website this morning, and some of the testimonials on there were just amazing. So I would highly recommend you do that. So
give them a call, 1-800-600-4096. Dr. Rouer, thank you so much. Some great information. We barely scratched the surface. Thanks for being our new expert here on 8 West.
It's great to be with y'all.
We'll be right back.
That's West.